The first thing I remember is the scent of lemons. Sharp, clean, cutting through the cloying perfume of rose water and ambergris that forever hung in the corridors of the Topkapi Palace. It was the day I arrived, a raw, sea-chilled morning in 1631. I was 10 years old, and my name was Katerina. They washed me in a marble hammam so vast the steam hid the ceiling. Silent, unsmiling women with hands like polish would scrub the journey from my skin. The smell of the Black Sea galley, the dust of the road from the port, the last lingering trace of my mother's lavender fragrance on my shift. They plucked and shaped, anointed and perfumed. My dark hair, the only thing I shared with my Greek mother, was braided and pinned away. They dressed me in soft, unfamiliar silks. "No more Katerina," one of them said in halting Greek. "You are Narcissa now, queen of the Narcissus," a name for a thing to be admired, fragile and rooted in darkness. I was a gift, a peace offering from a defeated Moldavian voivode to Sultan Murad IV, the shadow of God on earth. I was not a captured slave in the usual sense. I was a transaction, a living symbol of submission. This, I was told, was an honor. My father had kept his head and the sliver of his rule by sending his only daughter into the gilded void. The harem was not a place, but an organism. It breathed, pulsed, and thrived on whispered secrets. It was a city of women, a universe sealed behind a gate of felicity. Over 1,000 of us, slaves, servants, concubines, wives, princes, and the Valide Sultan, the Queen Mother, who was its absolute ruler. We were the heart of the empire, yet we were invisible. Our power was immense, yet entirely contingent on a reflection of our beauty in a single man's eye. My first years were a lesson in exquisite relevance. I was taught Turkish, Arabic, and Persian. I learned to recite poetry, to play the ney, to embroider with threads of gold. I studied the Quran. I learned the intricate grammar of hierarchy, who could look at whom, who to serve, who to fear. The ultimate goal, whispered in dormitories at night, was the elixir, a single night in the Sultan's bed. That was a lottery ticket, the only path from being a thing to being a person of consequence. To bear a son was to grasp a piece of eternity. I saw Sultan Murad only once from a distance in those early years, a broad, terrifying figure with a fearsome mustache, his aura one of violence and melancholy. He was more a force of nature than a man, a rumor of steel and blood. The harem trembled at his moods. We lived the rhythm of his desires and his rages. My friend was Safai, a Circassian girl with eyes the color of a forest lake. We were the same age, brought in the same season. At night, in our small cell, we created a tiny world of our own. We whispered of the outside, of forests and mountains, of foods we could no longer taste. We invented stories where we were pirate queens or shepherdesses. Our friendship was the one pure, uncommodified thing in the harem, a secret spring in a desert calculation. "We will stay together, Nergis," she would vow, clutching my hand in the dark. "We will be like the twin cypresses in the fourth court, bending together in the wind, but never breaking." I believed her. I believed in the resilience of our shared soul. It was the armor I wore against the creeping awareness of my fate. I was being polished, like a stone in a river, to be placed in a setting I did not choose. But as long as Safai's hand was in mine, I felt I could retain a kernel of Katerina, the girl who loved the smell of lemons and the feel of rain. Then, when I was 16, the river's current changed. The chief black eunuch, the Kisler Agassi, a man named Sambal Aga with a face like a benevolent moon, summoned me. His chambers smelled of sandalwood and ledger books. "Nergissa," he said, his voice a soft rumble, "you have grace. You have learned our ways. The Valide Sultan, Kozum Sultan herself, has taken notice." My blood ran cold and hot at once. Kozum Sultan, the most powerful woman in the empire, perhaps the world. Wife and mother of sultans, the deft weaver of destinies from behind the silken curtain. To be noticed by her was to be pulled into the very center of the web. "You are to be assigned to the private chambers of Prince Orhan," Sambal Aga continued, his eyes missing nothing. "As a need I'm a companion, a great honor. He is a precious son of the Sultan, Prince Orhan, Murad's second son, a child of 5. This was not the path to the Sultan's bed. This was a different path entirely. Into the nursery of empire, into the perilous world of the Sait Saad, the princes. They were the future. But in the Ottoman dynasty, the future was a dangerous place to be. A prince's life was a candle in a storm. I bowed, my mind reeling. This was safety of a sort, distance from the Sultan's unpredictable eye. But it was also a declaration. I was being marked as an asset to the dynasty's continuity, not its pleasure. My fate was now tied to a little boy's survival. That evening, I found Safai in the courtyard by the tulip beds. She was unusually quiet. When I told her my news, she did not smile. Her beautiful lake eyes clouded. "The prince's quarters," she said slowly, tracing the petal of a crimson tulip. "That is significant." "It means we are safe," I insisted, taking her hand. "Both of us. I will find a way to have you assigned there, too." But she pulled her hand away gently. "Our paths are diverging, Nergis, like streams from a fountain." She looked at me, and for the first time I saw a calculating light in her gaze, a light I did not recognize. "The Valaid's eye is on you, but the Sultan's eye wanders, and I must catch it." The hook was in my heart then, a cold, sharp tug. The gulf between us, between the girl I was and the woman I was becoming, between the friend I loved and the rival she might need to be, opened silently at our feet. The scent of lemons had long since faded. Now, all I could smell was a heady, treacherous perfume of ambition, and beneath it the first faint coppery tang of blood. Prince Orhan's apartments were a world of tense, managed tranquility. Located in the caves, the cage, a secluded, comfortable, but heavily guarded section of the harem for the Imperial princes. They were designed to keep him alive but isolated. Here, the Sait Saad were raised away from the intrigues of court, yet they were at the very epicenter of them. Orhan was a slight, serious child with large, watchful eyes that saw too much. He spoke in careful, complete sentences like a little vizier. His mother, a gentle, anxious concubine from Abkhazia named Chihan, lived in a state of perpetual, silent terror. Her love for her son was a raw, exposed nerve. Every gift of sweets was scrutinized for poison. Every new servant was a potential assassin. My role as Needime was to be a companion, a tutor in manners, a reader of stories, and another pair of watchful eyes. I grew to love him in his solemnity. I saw the ghost of my own lost childhood, the weight of a destiny too heavy for small shoulders. I taught him Greek letters in secret, telling him myths of Hercules and Odysseus. He preferred them to the Ottoman tales of conquest. "Hercules had labors," he whispered once, as I tucked him into his embroidered bedding. "Clear tasks. My only task is to live." It is harder. The harem outside our sequestered world was shifting. Sultan Murad's rages grew more frequent, his paranoia contagion. Executions of officials were commonplace. The air in the palace tasted of fear. And Safai, my beloved Safai, was ascending. She had been noticed. Her Circassian beauty, the pale, luminous skin, the cascade of night-dark hair, was impossible to ignore. She had a laugh that sounded like water over stones, a laugh she now used with deliberate artistry. She was promoted to Gedikli, a personal attendant to the Sultan himself. I saw her less and less. When I did, she was adorned in finer silks, her gait more measured, her gaze more distant. We were still friends, but it was a friendship remembered, performed like a familiar dance whose steps were growing awkward. One afternoon, I was walking with Orhan in the small, walled garden allotted to him. He was chasing a butterfly, a rare moment of unguarded childhood joy. From an adjacent lattice window, I heard voices, the low murmur of the Valaid Sultan Kozum and the higher, polished tone of Sambal Aga. The Sultan's health is not robust. Kozum's voice was like honey on a blade. The wars, the drink, God's was inscrutable. We must look to the future. Prince Orhan is bright. But young, Valaid Sultan, Sambal murmured. And his mother, she has no faction. Precisely, Kozum replied, a note of cold satisfaction in her voice. A clean slate, a prince who needs guidance, not a mother who demands power. The girl with him, the Moldavian, Nergissa, she is loyal to the child. She is clever. She has no allies but the prince. Good. Keep her close. She may be useful. We need calm hands around the next sapling, Sumbul Aga. The winds are about to blow. I stood frozen, Orhan's laughter fading in my ears. The butterfly had flown away. I was a clean slate. Useful. The next sapling. The conversation was a map of the abyss. Murad was dying. The scramble for succession was beginning in whispered conversations behind lattices. And Orhan, my little charge, was being sized for a throne or a coffin in the Ottoman dynasty. The two were often the same. The law of fratricide, where a new sultan would execute his brothers to secure the throne, was a fresh horror under Murad's father. It hung over every prince like a ceremonial sword. That night, I couldn't sleep. I slipped out to the courtyard fountain, the common confessional for sleepless harem women. To my surprise, Safai was there, alone, staring at the water. She looked ethereal and utterly exhausted. Safai! She turned. For a fleeting second, the girl I knew was there, bare and afraid. Then the mask of the Imperial concubine settled back. Nergis, you are awake, as are you. She sighed, a sound profound weariness. He is the storm. To be near him is to be battered. It is glorious and terrifying. She meant the Sultan. He asked about you today. A jolt of ice went down my spine. Me? He saw you in the garden with the prince last week. He remarked on your composure. She looked at me, her eyes glittering in the moonlight. It is not a safe thing to be remarked upon, Nergis. I serve the prince, I said, too quickly. We all serve the empire, she corrected softly. In the end, your path is with the future. My mind is with the now, the all-consuming now. She reached out and touched my cheek, a ghost of our old intimacy. Be careful in the cage, my cypress. Sometimes the walls are not to keep danger out, but to keep it contained. She left me then, a silken shadow melting into the darker ones of the corridor. Her warning was clear. My association with Orhan was both my protection and my target. I was in the eye of the gathering storm, tethered to a child who was a pawn in a game played by giants. Kozum, the master strategist, Murad, the dying lion, and the other princes and their ambitious mothers. Months dripped by like cold honey. Then, in the bitter winter of 1640, the storm broke. Sultan Murad IV, the conqueror, the tyrant, the melancholic, died in his chambers from cirrhosis. The news surged through the harem like a silent shockwave, a collective intake of breath, followed by the frantic, muffled scramble of a world reordering itself. The heir was his brother, Ibrahim, Orhan's uncle, a man known not for ferocity but for instability, hidden away in the caves for his own safety most of his life. The law of fratricide had been inconsistently applied. Ibrahim lived, and now he was sultan. For Prince Orhan, this was, in theory, a reprieve. The new sultan's own sons would be the primary threats to each other. Orhan was now a nephew, a step removed. But in the harem, reprieves were illusions. Ibrahim's ascension meant a new Valide sultan, his mother Turin, and a new constellation of power. Kozum's influence, though still vast, was suddenly contested. I was summoned again to Sumbul Aga's chamber. The benevolent moon of his face was grim. The cage is no longer a sanctuary, Nergissa, he said without preamble. Sultan Ibrahim is capricious. He fears plots from every shadow. All princes, even nephews, are seen as flickers of rival light. Your duty is more critical than ever. You must be his eyes, his ears. You must make Prince Orhan appear studious, pious, and utterly devoid of ambition. He must be a scholar, not a claimant. Do you understand? I understood. We had to perform obscurity. We had to act ourselves into irrelevance to survive. It was a tightrope over a pit of lions. Back in Orhan's chamber, the boy, now 9, looked at me. He had heard the news. The silence of the palace had its own language, and he was fluent. My uncle is sultan, he said, his voice flat. Yes, my prince. Does that mean we are safe? I knelt before him, taking his small, cold hands in mine. I looked into his 2 old eyes. I could not lie, not to him. It means we must be like the mice in the walls, my light, quiet, unseen, and very, very clever. He nodded a tiny, grave acceptance. In that moment, I was no longer just Nergissa, the companion. I was a strategist, his guardian, his only shield. The scent of lemons was a forgotten dream. Now, the air was thick with the smell of extinguished candles and cold fear. The tragic fate was no longer an abstract story. It was the ground beneath our feet, and it was beginning to crack. Sultan Ibrahim's reign was the harem's descent into a waking nightmare. Where Murad had been a terrifying but predictable storm, Ibrahim was a chaotic squall in a mirrored room, plagued by deep-seated paranoia from his long confinement. He saw treason in a misplaced glance and rebellion in a whispered conversation. His whims were law, and they grew increasingly bizarre and brutal. The harem, under the fierce struggle between the elder Valide Kozum and the new sultan's mother, Turin, became a battleground. Factions formed and shattered like ice on a turbulent river. Women who had risen under Murad or Kozum found themselves exiled to the old palace, a gilded retirement that was a polite form of oblivion. For Safai, the change was catastrophic. Her beauty, which had captivated Murad, meant nothing to Ibrahim. Worse, her association with the old regime made her suspect. I found her one day in a deserted linen room, her glorious hair hidden under a simple scarf, her hands red from washing. She had been demoted to a laundress. The vibrant, ambitious girl was gone. In her place was a woman hollowed out by shame and fear. "He calls me Murad's leftover," she whispered, her voice raw. "They say he is only stimulated by virgins, new girls brought in every week. He surrounds himself with them like sweets." Her laugh was a broken thing. All that work, Nergis, all that hope, for this. My heart ached for her. The ruthless calculus of the harem had crushed her. I risked bringing her extra food, news, moments of stolen friendship, but helping her was dangerous. Her fall had marked her, and any connection to her was a stain. Meanwhile, the performance of Prince Orhan's insignificance became our daily liturgy. I drilled him in theological debate, steering his sharp mind toward obscure points of Islamic philosophy, far from the pragmatics of rule. We published nothing, held no salons. He became a ghost prince, a footnote in the palace records. I reported his tedious daily routine to Sumbul Aga with meticulous boredom, but the cage's walls were porous. Ibrahim's paranoia was a vine that crept everywhere. One afternoon, a sleek, handsome Khalfa, senior servant, named Layla, who served in Turin Sultan's inner circle, visited our apartments. She brought sugared almonds for Orhan and complimented his calligraphy with a smile that didn't reach her serpentine eyes. "The Valide Turin Sultan asks after the prince's health," she purred. "She is a mother to all the dynasty's sons. She worries he is too secluded. A prince should have broader influences." It was a threat cloaked in benevolence. Turin wanted her own eyes on Orhan, or perhaps wanted to pull him into her orbit to use against Kozum. I bowed deeply. "The prince's health is delicate. Esteemed Khalfa, the physicians advise quiet and study. His devotion to his books and prayers is his solace and his strength. We are grateful for the Valide's maternal concern." Layla's smile tightened. She saw the performance, but could not yet find a flaw in it. After she left, my hands trembled. We were on a chessboard, and the queen had just moved into our quadrant. The pressure intensified. A tutor known for Republican sympathies was suggested for Orhan. I had to engineer the man's dismissal by fabricating a minor scandal involving pilfered ink. A gift of a magnificent Arabian horse, a symbol of warrior potential, arrived. I had to make Orhan appear to develop a sudden, fearful allergy to the animal. We lived in a constant state of deflection, our lives a delicate web of lies. Through it all, Safai was my secret vulnerability. Our meetings grew riskier. One evening by the fountain, she gripped my arm, her eyes wild with a new, desperate plan. "There is talk, Nergis," she hissed, "among the junior stewards. Ibrahim is mad. The Janissaries grumble. The Grand Vizier is a fool. They say the only sane male blood is Prince Orhan." My blood turned to sludge. "Quiet. That is death speaking." "It is life speaking," she insisted. "If he were sultan, If you were by his side, you could lift me up. You could save me from this hell of scrubbing and scorn. We could be powerful together as we dreamed. I stared at her, aghast. My friend had become a potential assassin, not a body's, but a future's. Her desperation was a torch that could set our carefully constructed world ablaze. Safai, no, you speak of treason. It would get him killed. It would get us all killed. Ibrahim may be mad, but he is the shadow of God. To whisper otherwise is to invite the executioner's rope. We are already in a silken noose, she cried, tears of frustration spilling over. At least let it be a noose of our own choosing. I had to choose. Between the friend who was my past and the prince who was my sacred charge. Between compassion and survival. It was a harem's oldest, cruelest lesson. I went to Sumbul Aga. I did not name Safai, but I spoke of dangerous murmurs among the disaffected, murmurs that foolishly invoked Prince Orhan's name. I begged for increased isolation, for a rumor to be spread of the prince's weak constitution, even of a mild consumption. Sumbul studied me, his gaze fathomless. You cut away a part of your own heart to protect the whole body, he said softly, not unkindly. It is the way of this place. It will be done. The next week, Safai was gone, not to the old palace, but vanished. Some said she was sent to a distant pasha as a gift. Others whispered of a midnight departure to the shores of the Bosphorus, a weighted sack. I never knew. I prayed for the former, feared the latter, and drowned my grief in the relentless vigilance of my duty. I had sacrificed my cypress twin to save the sapling. The cost was a piece of my soul. The silken noose was around my own neck now, woven from loyalty, guilt, and the relentless pressure to keep a child alive in a palace that saw his existence as a perpetual threat. The tragedy was no longer something that happened to other princesses in stories. It was a loom on which I wove my every day, the shuttle moving back and forth, threading guilt with fear, love with betrayal, creating a tapestry of exquisite, unbearable survival. Years passed in a tense, watchful rhythm. Prince Orhan grew from a solemn child into a slender, intellectual youth of 15. His performance of harmless scholarship was now a second nature to us both. He had the pallor of someone who lived in books and shadows, his shoulders slightly stooped as if from the weight of invisible chains. To the court, he was the scholar prince, a benign eccentric, more interested in Persian odes and politics. It was a masterpiece of defensive disguise. Sultan Ibrahim's madness ripened into grotesque fruit. His obsession with fur, he demanded his entire palace be lined with it. His erratic executions and his scandalous personal conduct finally exhausted the patience of the empire. In 1648, the Janissaries and the religious leaders united with the palace factions. The pivotal force was Kozum Sultan, the grand manipulator, who saw her son's reign destroying the dynasty she had dedicated her life to. Ibrahim was deposed in a violent coup. He was dragged from the harem, screaming and begging. We heard the cacophony from the cage, the clash of arms, the roar of the mob, the final, awful silence. A few days later, the news came. He had been strangled with a silk bowstring. The law of fratricide had been delivered to a sultan by his own people. A new sultan was elevated, Ibrahim's 7-year-old son, Mehmed IV, a child. And so, the regency began a fierce, silent war between the two allied sultans, the young mother, Turin, and the experienced grandmother, Kozum. Our world once again was upended. With a child on the throne, all male heirs became exponentially more dangerous. Orhan was no longer a distant nephew, but the dead sultan's brother, an adult prince with a credible claim. He was a lightning rod in a thunderstorm. Kozum Sultan summoned me. It was the first time I stood in her presence. She was older, but her eyes were like polished onyx, missing nothing. She sat amidst cushions like a spider in the center of a perfect web. "Nergissa," she said, her voice dry as ancient parchment. "You have done well. The scholar prince lives, and more importantly, he is seen as no threat. This is a valuable achievement." I kept my eyes lowered. "We serve the dynasty, your majesty." "Do you?" She let the question hang. "You serve the prince. It is natural. A mother cat defends her single kitten against a pack of wolves. But now the pack has a new alpha pup, and the grown cats are a problem." She sipped her sherbet. Turin fears you. She fears the quiet prince and his clever needime. She will move against him. Soon. A fist of ice closed around my heart. The prince seeks only knowledge and God's grace. What the prince seeks is irrelevant. What he is the threat. I can protect him, Kozum said, leaning forward. But I require something. Anything, Valide Sultan. Your absolute loyalty. To me, not to him. You will be my eyes and hands within his cage. You will report to me on his every thought, every visitor, every secret longing. You will ensure he continues a performance of indifference, and you will gently steer his mind away from any thoughts of the throne, even in his private heart. You will, in essence, become the keeper of his cage, not just his companion. She was asking me to become Orhan's jailer, to systemize a betrayal I had practiced in fragments, to poison his sanctuary from within. The silken noose was being pulled taut by the most powerful hands in the empire. I had no choice. To refuse was to condemn him immediately. I understand. I whispered, the words ashing my mouth. Good. Remember, girl, in saving him, you must erase him. It is the only way. My return to Orhan's apartments felt like a walk to the executioner's block. He was in the library, translating a Greek astronomical text. He looked up and his smile, rare, genuine, trusting, was a knife in my soul. Nergis, look, this passage on the moons of Jupiter, it's extraordinary. The Valide Kozum Sultan is well pleased with your studies. I interrupted, my voice strangely formal. She encourages their depth, but she advises caution. The political climate is fragile. Your focus should be on spiritual and philosophical texts. Astronomy can be misconstrued as interest in broader horizons. The light in his eyes dimmed, just a fraction. He was too intelligent not to hear the subtext. I see, he said quietly, setting down his pen. Of course, we must be mindful of misconceptions. From that day, I became the agent of his diminishing. I censored his reading. I discouraged visitors, even harmless scholars. I reported trivialities to Kozum. His preference for green ink, his fondness for a particular kind of honey cake, his melancholy on the anniversary of his father's death. I turned his life into a bland, monitor report. He knew. He never accused me, but sometimes I'd catch him looking at me, a sad, profound understanding in his gaze. The trust between us grew thin and brittle. I was killing his spirit to save his life, and we both knew it. The tragedy was no longer an external force. I had internalized it. I was its instrument. The Regency War reached its climax. Turin Sultan, fearing Kozum would replace her son Mem with the more pliable Orhan, struck first. In a night of terror, Kozum Sultan's own guard was subverted, and the great Valide, the power behind the throne for decades, was murdered in her chambers. The palace held its breath. Turin was now the sole regent. Her first act was to secure her position by neutralizing all potential rivals. The order came on a rain-lashed night, delivered by a stone-faced Sumble Aga, who had deftly switched his allegiance to the rising sun. Prince Orhan is to be relocated to a new apartment, for his safety and contemplation. It was a euphemism. The caves had levels of isolation, and this was the deepest. It was a sentence of living death. Orhan received the news with eerie calm. As he packed his few personal items, his books, his writing box, he turned to me. Will you come with me, Nergis? It was a question I dreaded. To go with him was to enter the darkest dungeon of the cage, to share his oblivion. To stay was to abandon him to solitude and despair. But Turin's order had been specific. The prince was to go alone. My usefulness, as either his guardian or Kozum's spy, was at an end. I am not permitted, my prince, I said, my voice breaking. He nodded, as if he had expected it. He walked to me and, for the first time since he was a child, took my hands. His were cold. You kept me alive, Nergissa. You carved a life for me out of shadows and silence. Do not blame yourself. This was always our destination. The cage was simply made smaller. He leaned forward and kissed my forehead, a blessing and a farewell. Then he turned and followed the eunuchs out the door, a slight figure in simple robes, leaving behind the ghost of the prince he might have been. I stood in the empty room, surrounded by the echoes of his voice, the ghost of his laughter, the imprint of his scholarly pursuits. The way of the world I had borne for him was gone, leaving only a crushing, hollow void. I had succeeded. I had saved his life. And in doing so, I had meticulously, lovingly prepared him for a fate worse than death, a life of perfect, ignored irrelevance. The ultimate tragedy of the Ottoman princess was not always death. It was the systematic erasure of a soul, and I, his most loyal protector, had become its most efficient scribe. The scent of lemons was now just a memory of a girl who died long ago, in a place where hope was the first and most necessary sacrifice.